So
that means there's a lot of different time zones too.
well, we're all here in Delft. That's the amazing thing, or Rotterdam. We're very close by to each other. Just we've been actually doing in-person education up until
that's right.
Christmas. Yeah. So
yeah.
Well, anyways, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome Jeanne Gang, the principal and founding partner of Studio Gang, to give this evening's Berlage Keynotes, which is a series of ongoing lectures by internationally prominent practitioners, designers, and thinkers. Jeanne is a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, her alma mater, where her teaching and research focuses on the cultural and environmental aspects of buildings reuse. She's the author of several books on architecture, most recently a monograph of the studio's work entitled Studio Gang Architecture, which was recently released. At any rate, before giving the floor over to Jeanne, I would just like to thank you again for accepting the invitation to do this over Zoom, which was not originally the plan when we started to organize this last spring, early summer. But nonetheless, this is not always the most ideal of circumstances, but we very much appreciate that you're still willing to share your ideas and your body of work with us in this manner. And we, again, hope that there's a moment that we can meet in person one of these days. And I would just like to say, I think from our perspective as a North American, I'm very well versed in your work, and more it's becoming more known within the European context, especially this project in Rotterdam, some of the other work. So I think for us, I found it very exciting to have this opportunity to have you speak and to share it and to help to maybe disseminate some of the very interesting ideas to another audience where that's, let's say, divided by the big pond. At any rate, thank you again. And the floor is yours, or the screen is yours, or the podium is yours. I still don't have the proper etiquette for these things down.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to coming in person and to maybe for reviews or something like that to meet everyone. I've been thinking a lot about. I'll give you some background on our firm too, because that we are less well known, let's say, in Europe. But I was thinking a lot about this last year and what it meant in terms of how we all share the same experience now. Like today, one thing is, well, we're in constant flux, we know that, but didn't we also see that this rapidly changing environment together in real time? Because the pandemic, it really caused this a lot of loss and suffering, but I was really struck by, like, almost for the first time through the virus, we had everyone on every continent using the same language to describe things in real time in every community. That's, of course, technology, we had that, but this is really the first time that is a kind of a shared experience, you know what I mean? And so everybody now knows about masks and physical distancing and misses the social interactions and touch that we humans need. So we really shared a lot, and I'm interested in shared experience, and I think that will help us to make the changes that we need to do in our human practices for climate and social inequities. And so I've been building the practice over the years. Today, we're doing much larger projects. Just some of the things that we have just finished or in progress. This is a large center for Beloit College, a student recreation center, a physical, it's a wellness center, and it's like 3 programs all wrapped up into one in this old former coal burning power plant. We're currently in construction on the American Museum of Natural History in New York, which is a new wing about education on science. We're in construction on the Arkansas Art Center, which is really a collection, a campus of buildings that we're editing and adding galleries to and adding social spaces. And then we have a project just beginning construction in Paris. It's the University of Chicago Paris Center, which will be their place for overseas studies for students, and the California College of the Arts, which is a really interesting timber structure in San Francisco. And of course, we have the Q residences in Amsterdam. In fact, that is in construction as well, 2 residential buildings that are paired in the south part of Amsterdam. But, you know, the thing about the sharing that I was talking about before, this recently published book by Faden, it kind of goes through and groups these projects in families and shows how they are related to each other, but how they make people relate to each other and to the environment. My first practice, just going backwards a little bit, this will be in like kind of 3 parts. The beginning of, you know, this idea about community and sharing and relationships in these first smaller scale projects, then taking that to a larger scale and then bringing it back to kind of more connected urban realms. But this picture shows my office before, when we were on the 2nd floor of this Aldo shoe store in Chicago, right across from this wig shop, in this very gritty part of the city. And at that time, I was really starting with projects that were community centers, and that all over the city, for some reason, it was just a program that found me, I guess, but it allowed us at Studio Gang to really learn these different communities. And Chicago really is a city full of these different kinds of communities, different characters, different nationalities that are immigrants from certain places gathering in parts of the city. So the first one was this Chinese American Service League, which is a community center for elderly people and children and in Chinatown. Then we worked on this SOS International Community Center. It was a place for foster children and foster parents and foster families. And this was their community center. It was really interesting because it was on this, everything about this project was donated, like donated materials, donated services, donated site, this green triangle. And the red is the community center, and the little homes going down along the railroad track were the foster homes. And so that one, it was really a kind of eye-opening because I saw that there was almost no money for this very important program. So in this project, we actually asked some of the big commercial projects downtown in Chicago to give us their extra concrete. And we developed a kind of a way to expose and show and celebrate this donated material of liquid concrete from different buildings coming together to create this shell, the frame of the building, which was so exciting for me because when we ripped off this formwork, you know, you could see the real pattern of the fluidity of the concrete, and each mix was kind of performing its best duty, and the strongest ones next to the weaker ones working together to create a support shell for the building. This community center in the Calumet area, the idea here, which is a kind of area that was full of former industrial sites, and we wanted to reduce the footprint of this building by using and reusing materials that were thrown out or left over. So this building was a kind of metaphor for a nest built by birds who are trying to use things that are abundant and nearby and available. And if you really take that on as a strategy for architecture, it's quite interesting, and it produced an incredible kind of thesis. Like these column clusters would, you start with what's there, what are the materials that you could find, and then these column clusters were designed structurally to work with whatever type of steel one could get at that time. A lot of steel is rejected from projects for various reasons, and normally it would have to go be remelted and reformed. But here we could use some of the members that were maybe slightly bent or flash rusted, and create these column structures. So we had to design these to be workable for for whatever we found. So this is really a different way of thinking about architecture. And that produced this kind of building that also had a protective mesh to protect migratory birds that move through the area. So with our projects, these early projects, it's really about the observation, and which is also called research, but I really think that this idea of observing that we can learn from looking at patterns of social behavior. And I realized in these early projects that instead of generating, kind of channeling this previous generation's preoccupation with purely formal moves, we could somehow use these skills and observation to affect change, to kind of instigate change through architecture, essentially one project at a time. So what's shown here is, I have to get my pictures out of the way there. On the left is a map of Chicago, and Chicago is always mapping itself by race, because it thinks of itself as a city of communities. And you see here the blue areas and our African American communities, and the red areas are Latino communities. And on the right, what we had done is just start to wonder, why is it that there is hardly anyone working in these neighborhoods with the architecture? So this drawing on the right shows the American Institute of Architects catalog, and the little black tick marks in there in the white areas, those are all the buildings that were considered by the AIA as significant architecture. So what we did was we mapped that out, and we found that there were these, what I called architecture deserts. There's no architecture that's significant. So, but the project that we were working on, the SOS project I just showed, and others were kind of in these areas. And so we thought that what if we had a project where we could slowly start to populate the architecture deserts with architecture. So SOS, the Ford Calumet Center, the boathouses, which I'll show you, the Cicero Project, West Side Garfield Park, and so on. So tapping into this kind of, I guess it's a certain kind of like optimism that we have, that with this habit of observation, that we can actually change things. I started to call this actionable idealism. It's kind of like an idea that we want to change things. We're not afraid to say that we're idealistic, but how do we get those things done? And can we do this in a kind of more intentional way? And so then we started to kind of produce things that instigated projects. So starting with the research instead of starting with the commission. And so this project was a book project called Reverse Effect that was really, it was produced in order to inform the public about some legislation that was coming up about whether to clean river water or clean wastewater before it was put back into the river. So we worked together with the Natural Resources Defense Council and other NGOs, the Joyce Foundation, to produce this book that was really about like, what is the state of the river? Maybe some of you know that the Chicago River was actually, the flow of it was reversed in order to save drinking water. And so they started to, instead of putting, pollution into the river and putting into the lake where the drinking water is, they actually did this giant project to reverse the flow. And so, but one of the things that we discovered in the book was there's a lot of potential to improve this waterway, because they're basically, a lot of industry that is moving out allows for area around the river to start to become area that can be put toward cleaning the river water. Eventually that project, that book project, was seen by the mayor of the city and others, and then we did some talks about it and things like that. And soon enough, a new mayor came in and wanted to put a mark on the city by reintroducing the public to the river. And so at that time, a number of architects, including ourselves, we were asked to do projects along the riverfront. And this one is a boathouse that would suddenly bring youth to the river. And even though the river is still polluted, the whole idea there was to create a whole new generation of stewards that would then care about the quality of the river. And I have to say, it's pretty amazing. I've rowed on the Chicago River, and it's one of those few, it's an incredible urban experience to be in it. So this is the first one we did. On the left, you can see the boathouse and field house there on the north side, and then another one on the south side. And it really created almost like this gateway and allowed people to get to this waterway. So if you can see what I'm trying to say, it's that, in a way, you're creating the future that you want to see through your practice. And that is what I've been trying to tap into. For the project, of course, the architectural form is important, and the design is important. And we were trying to, in this project, really make this moment of engagement with the river very exciting and dynamic. Looking a lot at the Muybridge images of stopgap photography and rowing. And then looking further in the position of the oars, this image shows these position of the oars starting to inform our roof shape. So we had a kind of a V shape as the oars are up, and an M shape. And those two forms moving from one to the other with straight elements allowed us to create these very large clerestory windows, which help to warm the slab inside of the storage building and reduce our energy use. Here's a little model of that building, and you can see this warped surface. All of this was, had to be done on a very tight budget, but also a fast schedule, as you have when you have projects that are supporting a political ambition, I guess you could say. But here, the ambition, a good one, to get people to the river and to create programs for youth in the city to help them succeed. This is done with slate on the exterior. The park district, who is, I guess, the client, wanted masonry buildings, and we convinced them that slate could be considered masonry. Inside, on the second floor of the field house, you have this Vierendeel truss system, kind of eking out an extra floor by using a Vierendeel and letting it support yet another floor and a roof, and using these very simple plywood, not high-end plywood, very affordable materials to create a very dynamic space with almost like the hull of a boat, and that does really give this dynamic. Now this program has begun to, there are classes there for veterans with disabilities. There's all kinds of people that are using this. This is the rowing tank, the indoor rowing tank for winter for practice. You can see it here. And, you know, it's really like supporting a social mission as well. A lot of kids use this place after school for studying, and that is the secondary role. It's really about, you know, using it for getting additional help in school. This is the one on the south side here, and introducing a whole diverse group of people to rowing, which then in turn can get them into college. So our practice, I showed you that map with all these different projects in the architecture desert, but we've continued to, as you know, we've grown to different cities. Like my office in New York, we worked on a similar kind of civic scale project in Brooklyn, in Brownsville. It's a place for fire rescue workers who are the people who rescue other like firemen and things like that. So this is in Brownsville, which is Brooklyn. There's only one. This is the entire, in all of New York. There's only one of these rescue houses per borough, so there's only 5 of them, and 2 is in Brownsville, and that one, you wouldn't believe how little resources they actually had. This is their building that they had before. And these are the people that, you know, went into the tower at 9/11. They lost a number of rescue workers from this house, but they then the city wanted to bring them more equipment and more ability to practice. So in this project, we were looking at, you know, what practice is for rescue workers. These are like test buildings that are used for that purpose. Lots of stairs, lots of openings, because essentially what they have to do is go into a burning situation with smoke, poke holes in the building, allow the smoke to get out and get in there and get people out. So I was amazed to learn that the rescue workers really know architecture. They know every single floor plan of the different styles of buildings in Brooklyn. This is kind of one of our sessions working with them to figure out how to design their practice facility. And this is the final building that we finished. It took a while, a number of years to finish this building, but it's really all about these voids, the voids that are used for practice. So you can see them up on the top, different ways to move in and out of this building and use it as a tool for learning how to fight fires and rescue people. It also has had this kind of positive impact on the neighborhood as well. When we first started there was nothing, and now it's really having this expansive effect. These are some of the views inside of the fire truck going in, and this void that goes up and down the middle, bringing in natural light to the gym and the other areas that they have for practice. This is the area there where you can see the scale on the wall, learning to judge the dimensions and et cetera. We're using really just a simple concrete tilt-up structure with some much fancier terracotta baguettes, I guess, around the openings to highlight those. And that was just finished like last year. So can actionable idealism be applied to just like projects that you get? Sometimes you don't know who is going to be the user of the project or even who's going to occupy the building. So I think, you know, a lot of people don't know that at the same time we were doing those kind of smaller scale community buildings, really at the same exact time I was working on the Aqua Tower. So it's just our practice has these different dimensions, and but we were thinking about this in a very similar way about like, how does this building start to create better neighbors, better relationships. You know, this was probably 2004 when we started this project, and it really wasn't common at all to have outdoor space on a tall tower. In fact, you know, the contractor really thought I was like crazy lady, you know, when I proposed this. But you know, again, starting with what is the question of this project? You know, I didn't really know if I wanted to do a tall tower. I of course was curious about it at the time, but I didn't understand really what it meant. It's such a different scale. And so we were working with, again, not-for-profits, looking at carbon footprints of people, this pattern of living in Chicago, let's say, living in a tower versus a suburban layout like this. And you can see this huge difference in the carbon footprint between these two styles of living, these patterns of living that are common in North America. So that was enough to make me want to explore it more. Discovering like that people really didn't talk much to each other in these towers, observing the behavior, like people in, you know, in elevators. It's kind of awkward, you know, being in an elevator and having that separation between living way up in a building and going to the outside. So that we took some cues from the landscape around Lake Michigan, like these irregular edges that seem to give you diagonal views and patterns that break up the monotony. And then, so this building was really done in a way of thinking of it as a topography, like on the right, where the hills would connect people to different things in the city around them, if they could step out onto those hills and see around corners and things that wouldn't be possible if you were just in the straight up facade, and see each other, of course. So that's really how it started to develop. So the irregularity is purposeful in that it allows this, you know, connectivity, but it also breaks up this strong winds that are troublesome for tall buildings, that are really make you have to use a lot more material in the structure. Some of these are very large, these balconies that can be, you know, parties and things like that, socially connect people to each other, and at the same time to the city beyond. So the balconies became, like, for these types of building, residential buildings in the city, they really became this, and they still are intriguing to me, this kind of way of making a threshold or an exterior space that's both inside and outside, almost like as your front stoop would be if you lived in New York, or a porch. And so this project called City Hyde Park explored using the balconies in this way to connect people. So each one of these is a stem, and you can see it here modeled on the right. And they're just rotated in different ways to give these different conditions. Sometimes they're 2 stories high, sometimes they're really more like this, you know, extended cantilever. But they really give an animation to the facade, a kind of a rhythm, and create this almost like a social network on the exterior of the building. By the way, they also take the gravity loads down to the ground so that we were able to, you know, disengage between the interior slab and the exterior slab to reduce the thermal, to create a thermal break and reduce heat loss in this climate. If you look at the plan, which is very simple again, the north side had these bay windows overlooking the city. I was thinking of that more like introverted people could live here and extroverted people could live on this south side with this really active, dynamic facade. And supposedly it has kind of worked out that way. This was designed for a mix of incomes, and it does include low income housing within it as well. So it's really a mixing chamber as well. And here you can see just this pattern, which is, it really starts to be Escher-esque. I mean, when you start looking at this side of the building. Another aspect of like how to design these commercial buildings with something in mind that's for the greater good, I guess, is this one called Solstice, which was really, again, thinking about the client here wanted to have balconies for like 30% of the units. So we thought of carving the facade back to create the solar protection. And so you see here how that works. And in Chicago, this is the solstice angle of the sun at 72 degrees, which means that in the summer, when there is a lot of heat gain, this angle really protects the entire interior spaces from direct sun. And in the winter, when you want that heat gain, it can come right in. And so that was kind of the proposition and question for this project. And just to show you how some of these things come out. Of course, this also makes really nice social spaces for people. This was a picture during construction. We're on the solstice, where you can see that angle like rendered in, light and shadow of what the whole idea of the building is. But then you get this almost like an expansive space on the inside that gives you this feeling of greater space than what the floor plan actually is. And then, lots of common areas in this building too, experimenting with living in the city and making that more interesting. And then there's this last one that I wanted to share about a commercial building, it's a office building. We had no idea who would be in this office building. So it's kind of designing it without a client, but this site is right along the High Line in New York. And you can see the West Side Highway beyond, and the Hudson River beyond that. And so just the framework for thinking of this project, our site starts right on the High Line and it goes back, was really taking a look at the high-rise code for New York, the tall building ordinance, which required, these are the illustrations by Hugh Ferris, showing that all the buildings in New York are to be carved back from the street in order to let light and air down to the street. So Hugh Ferris did these images showing, taking the code and translating it into a building. So you get the step back skyscraper. So what I want to show you is a kind of turning that a little bit on its head, because when we apply to our site this red L shape, this setback ordinance, you get that step back skyscraper, right? But actually with the amount of area we have, we actually get this, an L-shaped building with a podium. When we looked at this and realized how the High Line had really become the public space on this site more so than the street, because the street is wide open to the river, we argued that, this site, when building along the High Line, which is an interior block public space, we need to think about this differently. And we proposed taking that area away from the High Line and putting it up on top, away from the High Line, and then further carving the building with the sun angles and view lines, so that people from the High Line, I'll go back one, people from the High Line could, sorry, I gotta go backwards this way, could actually see, to the river. And this is different than what most people were doing at the time along the High Line. Everybody was trying to push out over it and get, the best views. It was just all about me. So this approach was looking at how can we shape the building for the better for the neighborhood. And so you can see versions of it here, different amounts of carving based on what kind of area we would be allowed to have. So here's the concept. And it turned out that, doing this, so we set it back from the High Line. We cut away areas near the High Line for views, and we ended up able to produce much more sun on that High Line than if we would have done the as of right. So here's our building and the light getting to the High Line, 1,164 hours compared to 351. If we would have just built it according to the code that was allowing it. So those special areas we treated differently with a different kind of window system. Again, we don't know who's going to be in this building, but in general, it gives a sense of awareness of the public space and awareness of what's important to the city and not just what's important to the building. At the same time, you get amazing spaces on the inside of this building. And so I think that's kind of what I was imagining of how we can translate this idea of actionable idealism to a commercial building. So finally, just wrapping up with a few projects that are focusing in on the relationships that architecture creates. It's almost like a stage, for setting up relationships, not only between us as people, but also between us and our environment, which I've touched on a little bit. Here, we were specifically asked this is the Arcus Center for Social Justice Leadership in Kalamazoo. We were specifically asked to create a building that's about making strong relationships between the students and faculty that are working on social justice projects and to the campus at large. And so this project, which is finished in about a 10,000 square feet project, we didn't really have any precedents for social justice centers. I mean, it wasn't like a program that existed. I hope they continue to exist and more are made. But we looked to precedents in different cultures of community meeting places where maybe the elders get together to discuss things that are important. And a lot of those are designed around water or fire or light and people facing into the center. And this one up on the upper left, it was interesting in Mali where the elders meet there, but they have a very low ceiling, so you can't stand up and get mad. Everyone stays seated and calm. The faculty really wanted something that would be welcoming and proud, and we designed this around a fireplace in the middle of a academic building. It's not exactly easy. And a kitchen were things that were seen to bring people together. So here you can see the faculty areas and the fireplace out beyond. And then a lecture hall that opens to this grove. And then for the exterior material, just to really embody the idea of social justice, maybe it could be a wall that is made by everyone. And so it was kind of an accident, but we discovered this method that was used in Wisconsin and Michigan with using cordwood masonry as well, like as masonry. So you're basically just using mortar and wood, a sustainable cedar wood that's grown locally, and then really working to understand that system and bringing it into the 21st century, which, of course, has resistance because people are, they haven't seen this before. So we actually had to do a lot of mock-ups. We had to buy the wood about a year in advance to let it dry. So there was a lot to doing this, and then to make it into a beautiful textile surface that weathers with its age, and at the same time is sequestering carbon within it. It is carbon. Trees are really, they are a physicality of carbon. And then another project that really creates relationships is this Writers Theater in Glencoe, Illinois, which is a small theater that they used to operate out of the back of a library bookshop. And in this area of town that's very kind of car oriented, north of Chicago. That's Lake Michigan beyond. So here, this theater company noticed the behavior of their patrons when they, when they left. They put on some very provocative shows, and people wanted to continue talking about them after the show. But there was no place to do that. In fact, there's really no civic space in this town whatsoever. And so the ambition for the project was also to create social space, community, by building a theater. And here the research focused on early theaters, the Shakespeare theaters that were done outside and in the round where people stood. And we decided to employ that idea to the lobby, not the theaters themselves, which are very particular, but a lobby that could double as a civic space. And in this case, I love that this walkway around the lobby goes inside and outside. It's kind of in the canopy of the trees, made with wood that is acting in tension, that is holding this walkway. You can see here there's Verandil wood trusses, and then the trusses go out beyond, or the beams on top of these trusses go out beyond, and then hang the walkway with the wood battens. And this big door, so that allows it to be kind of like totally open to the park on one side, and then connect to the different levels in a very social space that's really transformed the town. I mean, now there are kids going there after school to study. There are cafes that want to be there. And then this other project, these are kind of like wood projects that create incredible community. This one is really a pavilion. They asked us to design a pavilion in this land that was owned by the park district, but the zoo nearby, the next door neighbor zoo, which is a free zoo, wanted to create a pavilion for students to study pond life. But in this project, instead of just thinking of the pavilion, we expanded to think about this whole area, which was formerly a kind of 19th century version of nature in the city, very picturesque, but making this thing become a real living ecosystem was the whole idea. And so the pavilion was one part of it, but the real project is really making a place that would attract and be habitat for animals. And so we really made this pond deeper, about 10 times deeper than it was, so that fish could winter over, that animals could start to live there, planting the right plantings to attract them. And it literally is like, they come there to display themselves, no cages. And it's also a draw for people. So we're setting up this new relationship to nature, not the picturesque, but one that is about studying urban wildlife, one that's about seeing the diversity of life in the middle of the city, which is not typical if you think about, the parks that we normally have in cities. And so I've been watching it. Over on the left is really the amount of these turtles that they have with sensors on them, so they can count and see where they move throughout the year. And then on the right is eBird, counts 183 species. I mean, that's amazing in one small urban park. So it's really incredible. Like these black crowned night herons that went from being 40 to 400 in that same time. And we have now like mammals, which is a really good sign of a healthy ecosystem, including coyotes, which are scary for some people, but in fact they've really adapted well to the city and help with reducing rat populations. Lots of different birds, as I said. So these are all amazing things. So the zoo actually started a program called the Urban Wildlife Institute based on this project. So it's having this action that is getting bigger. Now, I only want to show you how it's impacting human relationships as well. And these are the pods that go over the pavilion. They're made of fiberglass, so they let light come in. So it started out being a classroom, but really it's become this magnet for people for doing all different kinds of things like dance and yoga, but mainly like the place where people go to get their photos taken for engagements and weddings. So it's like this, it really is creating like these relationships, or setting the stage for these relationships to take place. So I think if architecture can make people start making out, I mean, then you're really having an impact, right? So it's all of these things coming together. One of my favorite things was really just when they took it over to do this big diner in Banque, which is a impromptu dinner around the whole entire boardwalk, which worked out amazing. Not all of these things are just like cheery nature stories. I mean, Memphis is we're working there on this riverfront concept and the parks along the Mississippi River. And it has a very troubled, past. It's a place where Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated and has had lots of troubles over the years. But they're on this gigantic, wide Mississippi River, whose levels change up to 50 feet, in difference in elevation. So it's it's difficult to occupy the edge of this river system with such a large change in heights of water over time. So the interesting thing here was that Memphis was really built with its back to the river. So on the left is the river, on the right is Front Street. So everything went onto Front Street. And so they really wanted to start shifting that and taking advantage of the riverfront. So they asked us to look at that. We become more and more working on urban scale because we're looking for these different assets that we can connect together to make these stronger relationships. So one interesting area here circled on the left was this big riverfront area that, and this is our plan on the left, starting to connect the city over to the riverfront and then along the riverfront. But Cobblestone Landing, this orange area, was very perplexing when we discovered it. It was a landing made with cobblestone, and it turns out that this island out here beyond was not originally there. So it was a loading land. And right when we were working on this project, we started asking people what they thought of it, and they had very mixed views. Different people thought different things about the space. And at the same time, this was a summer when 2 Civil War monuments that were very offensive, one of Jefferson Davis there and Orange, were taken down. The other one was Bedford Forest over on the right. I don't know if you can see it. And so this is the Cobblestone Landing, kind of in disrepair. It was a place for commerce and shipping and loading. And then it became many different things. It was a parking lot for a while. It was a place where World War I soldiers' caskets were returned, but it was also a place of cotton, the cotton industry, which means that people who were enslaved, African Americans, worked on the stock. They were not traded there, but they worked on this place. So that's why this had this very difficult history. So Tammy here, Sawyer, who started this movement of Take Them Down, was really inspiring. She actually got these 2 offensive statues of the Confederate leaders taken down while we were there. So we thought, what if this Cobblestone Landing could somehow become a more inclusive type of marker, a monument, something that's not putting a statue on a horse on a pedestal, but something that would represent the whole community. So we started a process where we engaged with community members, and it really was the question of how can communities remake public spaces with complex histories. So as we did this, we picked some different leaders from different realms. That's Tammy Sawyer there, and we recorded her story and sketched what she was saying, and really started to talk to different people throughout the city. This is Nicholas, and he was really he's something like 80 some years old, and he's a sanitation worker who walked with Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was very interesting, Elmore Nickelberry, and he wanted to talk about that march, but also his relationship to Memphis, and we sketched that. So what we tried to do here, and it's still not a finished project, it's still one of the future projects we'll be doing there. We tried to bring like community stories into the cobblestones. So putting all these things together, putting the sketches together, trying to interpret them into these cobblestones, which we were able to get a number of them and start to incorporate these designs into them. Maybe some of you might have seen this, which was shown at the Venice Biennale in 2018. And so these are just some of the different ones. We shipped these stones over to Venice and installed a piece of the Cobblestone Landing there, and then also showed the stories and the stories of Memphis and the stories of some of these citizens. So that's really all I wanted to show you. Today, you know, we're working in these different cities. These are different locations, but we're still working on projects that don't have clients. I sometimes to try to improve our cities where we are. In Chicago, we have this green roof that we installed here, and we're really working on this idea of a biodiverse green roof, where we planted something like 48 different plants on this roof as an experiment. And we use this bird-safe glass so that we reduce the number of bird strikes with glass, which is a problem in cities. We have the bees, and we have this every year an annual bio blitz to record and understand how many different species are are there. And what was really cool is this year we found out that these are scientists from the Field Museum helping us to look at the soils. We found out that we are now a floristic habitat up here, which is a high level of biodiverse habitat. That was over 5 years we were able to create that on our roof. And so this is the different years of the bio blitzes. So we keep trying to increase the number of species by putting different things like logs for fungi, and now we're starting a project of measuring the air quality up there compared to normal. So this is just an ongoing experiment that has to do with this idea of actionable idealism and how we spend our time. So ideally, what we want to do here is to start to convert our neighbors and create this really like a biodiverse corridor in the sky. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess normally we would do a round of applause if we were in person. No, thank you for the very thoughtful and considered talk. I know that a few of our students have some questions. I see Danny raised her hand. Hi, Daniela.
Hi. Well, thank you, Jeanne, for the lecture. I really appreciate it. Well, my question is, how do you balance the time from researching and then designing? I like to understand the possibilities of practices that do design-related research, which is something that sometimes can be separated from practice to practice. So my question is, how did you were able to arrive at this integration of your practice, and how do you balance it?
That's a good question. We've tried different things to try to, I mean, all of this research that is independent research ends up informing our projects. So I think it enriches the actual commissioned projects that we get. And that's the whole idea, so that we can deploy these ideas and they're ready to go. I looked at one point trying like starting a not-for-profit separate, but the problem I found with that, at least in the US, if we do that, it wouldn't be possible for my colleagues that are working on, paid projects to then work on these ones for the not-for-profit, because there's something about it keeps it separate, right? So that didn't seem like a good idea, because people want to work on all these different projects and not just be stuck in one type. So we still work on the basis of using our own profit to fund some of these, projects, and just reserve. So it's basically like, projects that make money help fund the projects that don't make money, basically. And then through it could be a project like a book project or an exhibition that starts to be the fuel for the research as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, but first, thank you for sharing those projects, especially the last. Your roof garden really inspired me to get to work in my own backyard. Let's see how many species we can count there. My question is related to our next upcoming project titled Project Global, where we're going to study and do a project in Mexico, I believe. And of course, due to COVID, we'll not be able to travel. And well, maybe to your practice, you say that community plays an important role in your office projects. But then in a situation like your project in Amsterdam, for example, where you also don't get to meet your tenants, how can you meaningfully engage with these communities? I'm curious to see how you deal with that, and yeah, hopefully we can learn some tricks for our upcoming project.
Yeah, well, it's such a good question, and it's so the projects I showed today in that commercial category, I guess, the kind of the projects without, you don't know who's going to be living there or occupying it. It's more about understanding the area or the neighborhood and the community groups that are around there. But I think what really I've started to do, this isn't exactly answering your question, but for me, it has been a process of starting to get these clients, which are developers, to get them interested in communities and to do projects with communities. So in a way, it's like these early projects of working with communities starting to, inform, like, to try to get our clients excited about working with communities. So that is starting to happen in a really interesting way, because I think a lot of developers, they don't know how, so they're looking to the architects now, at least to us, about how to help them engage with communities. So that's interesting development, I think. But then for you guys, when you are working in Mexico or globally, you have to do what we're doing right now and try to find people that you can talk to directly. I always find that, like, it's pretty easy to identify leaders of groups, and that's usually better, because they, like, the leaders of local groups, because they are aware of all the stuff that's happening around and can put you in contact with other people that you need to know. So at my GSD studio last semester, I did a project in the national parks in the Great Smoky Mountains, and it was so much easier because of COVID to get an audience with the different people, really interesting people that are willing to share some time with you in that format. So I think it should be kind of an advantage, at least, you can get 30 minutes from someone, as opposed to having to set up an appointment, fly there, and read. So yeah, it's not as fun, but it should work.
Thank you. It sounds like it might be even more efficient in a way.
Yeah.
Thanks.
yeah, cast a broader net.
Thank you for the lecture. I had a question if you could expand more on your you use a varying degree of materials throughout your project, and kind of your selection process, your design process with them, because you really push the forms in some of them. And especially I'm curious too how that relationship works with your engineers and your general contractor and your practice within a whole in terms of design and how it's implemented.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I have a very special way of working with materials, I think, which comes from when I was teaching at the IIT, Illinois. When I first got out of school, I was teaching there, and they actually taught their studios based on which material it is. Like, you're in the brick studio, you're in the wood studio, so I had to kind of shift my way of thinking about materials to teach that. And it really had an impact on my practice, because I've always really loved working with materials, but it's one of the first things that I try to determine, like, what is the structure going to be? Sometimes it's wrong, like it ends up being something else, and you have to kind of shift your thinking. Like, for example, with the SOS community center I was showing you with the wavy concrete, initially that was going to be a brick building with a steel backup, but then it was too so I had a whole scheme for that, and then that was determined not by us but by the owner, because they could get they thought that they could get this brick donated. So when it was taken away, it was suddenly like liberating, like, oh, well, what if we could get concrete? And then, so it's the idea, I think, should emerge out of this material. It doesn't always work 100%, but it can be. And then I try to express the qualities for which that material is good at doing. That's not good English, but express the qualities that the material is capable of, because, like, for example, wood can be in tension. That's why those tendons on the writer's theater are like that. Or it can also be a good masonry material. And so knowing the material earlier in the process gives you an advantage, because then you can explore what that material is capable of. Sometimes, I mean, and often with, like, say, a commercial project, let's say a residential building, that it's usually concrete today, because that is the material that's the best acoustically, and the challenge is just trying to get the carbon footprint down of it. But that's pretty much, that it's going to be that, so you can start with that as an idea, which is what we did with the Aqua Tower. It's a fluid material. It can be flow into a form and express itself as this fluid form. So yeah, I think the earlier you know that material, the better, because then you can start to play with it and its tectonics and its capabilities.
Thank you.
Is there another question from somebody? I maybe have just one. I mean, let's say the American side of the practice is very atypical because of its sort of community-based engagement, which, I mean, perhaps for the Europeans, this may not, they may not be aware of how atypical that is, since there's more of a kind of collusion within this kind of context of, let's say, socially engaged ideas or practices, right? They're not separated. And I just wonder, moving then from that kind of working and now expanding into other kinds of projects, well, the Paris project, the Amsterdam housing. I mean, do you see a difference, or how do you choose? How do you engage in the way that you
Right.
would like to continue engaging with when it's in a completely
Yeah.
different context?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I did not experience when I worked in Europe a particularly adeptness at socially engaged projects. I mean, I worked for a very well-known Dutch architect, and it wasn't.
Right.
I mean, there's a social idea, but there's not a social engagement, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But the social engagement, I found that the European maybe context was more at that time, and probably everywhere at that time, more like good intentions from afar and less like, tell me what you want, you know? And so, but I found that to tell me what you want and to find the ways to engage with people is not threatening to some kind of aesthetic idea. I mean, they are, of course, people are going to throw out some ideas that are, you know, it's not something you would do, but, you know, so what? You just listen and things come out of it, but you need that process to allow the input to get into the project, and that gives a higher degree of success, I think. But to your question about how to do it now from afar, I mean, my strategy has been to set up local offices. So instead of being a global office, we're like 4 local offices right now that can also work together, of course, to share resources and expertise. So it's Chicago and New York and San Francisco and Paris. And each one has its own team that is local, that can be connected to the community. But then if it's somewhere, you know, so that has a certain kind of regional reach. If it is something that is outside of those areas, then we have to, you know, of course, find the right partner and work with someone that is local. Because I really do think it is important to have that connection.
Yeah. No, very clear. If there's no final question from any of the students, then I would, just like to say thank you again for the lovely lecture and for the engaging conversation. So
you're welcome. It's nice to see everyone's faces. Hopefully see you in person.
So
this year. All right.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
So
All right.
everybody have a good evening. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for the clap icons.
Bye.